Committee. Upon the resumption of debate, it being 2 p.m, we'll move to questions without notice. I will give senators a time to enter the chamber and take their seats. I'll ask senators to take their seats, and I'll call Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Mr President, I table for the information of the Senator revised ministry list. I seek leave to have the document incorporated into Hansard and to make a short statement.
Order. Order. Senator Birmingham, leave is granted. Yes, Senator Birmingham.
Thank you, Mr President. I advise the Senate that the updated ministry list reflects the updated ministry announced by the Prime Minister on 22 June 2021 and the appointment of Mr Joyce as the Deputy Prime Minister.
Order. Senator McAllister.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Hume. This morning on RN, the Minister for Environment, Susan Lee, refused to guarantee Mr Morrison's preference for net zero emissions by 2050 would survive Mr Joyce's return as Deputy Prime Minister, saying, and I quote, "We will have discussions with the Nationals."
Order. Order. Senator McKenzie. Senator McAllister, please continue.
Wow. Have these discussions started yet?
Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President. I'll take the question on notice.
Order. Senator McAllister, supplementary question.
Minister Ley went on to say that, and I quote, "Of course, we want to reach net zero as soon as possible, and I don't think anyone in the government would disagree with that." Does anyone in the Morrison-Joyce government disagree with reaching net zero as soon as possible?
Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President. I can't imagine why anyone in the government would not want to reach net zero emissions as soon as possible.
Senator Order. Senator McAllister, a final supplementary question.
National Senate Leader Senator McKenzie has said, and I quote, "There is no agreement with the second party of this coalition government on any target date for zero emissions. In fact, it would fly in the face of the Nationals' public policy commitment." Is Senator McKenzie right?
Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President. I can't imagine why Senator McKenzie's response is in any way, shape or form contradictory to that of which Susan Lee said this morning.
Order. Senator Brockman.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and
Senator
Family
Brockman,
Business.
please pause. I'd like to be able to hear Senator Brockman's question. Senator Brockman.
Thank you, Mr President. Senator Cash. The mining sector generates billions of dollars of economic activity and employs hundreds of thousands of Australians. Can the Minister inform the Senate how the Morrison government is securing our economic recovery by supporting jobs and investment in the mining sector, particularly in our home state of Western Australia?
Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Brockman, a fellow Western Australian, for that question. And, Mr President, the Morrison government is committed to putting in place the right economic framework to support the creation of jobs in my home state of Western Australia and, indeed, right across the economy. Mr President, one of the things that we will do is support big job-creating projects, particularly in the mining and resources sector, because the Morrison government understands the contribution that the mining and resources sector makes to not just Western Australia, and that's right, Senator Abetz, just like Joel Fitzgibbon, but also to Australia as a whole. We've already seen our economy rebounding back strongly after the COVID-19-induced recession. Unemployment is now down to 5.1%. Underemployment is at its lowest level since 2014. In May, just last month, 115,000 new jobs were created. 85% of those new jobs were full-time jobs, and 60% of the 115,000 jobs went to women. But we also know there's still more work to do, and that's why the mining industry is in need of skilled workers. And what we're doing as the Morrison government is putting in place the right policy framework so that Australians can get the skills that they require to get into the mining sector. We're doing this in a variety of ways, Mr President, including through our $1 billion Job Trainer Fund, providing free or low-cost training in areas of labour market need, but also by extending the highly successful Boosting Apprenticeships Commencements wage subsidy. And, Mr President, we've also committed, as the Morrison government, to helping the mining sector by speeding up approvals for big projects and cutting red and green tape. And don't forget, Mr President, we're the side of politics that put forward reforms to greenfield agreements that would have given the mining industry certainty in terms of their industry investment.
Senator Brockman, a supplementary question.
I certainly do, Mr President. Thank you. Can the minister outline
Senator
how
Brockman, I'm going to ask you to start again because there was way too much noise there for me to hear his question. Really, Senator Ayres, I'd appreciate some respect to the chair. Senator Brockman.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister outline how the government's economic plan, including lower taxes, reducing red and green tape and boosting skills and training, will provide greater certainty for mining investment and job creation?
We're wasting time for the opposition, Senator Ayres. I'll call Senator Cash when there's silence. Senator Rennick, that's not helpful. He wouldn't be the first person that came to mind for interjections. Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, those on the other side make fun of jobs. It is a fact that we have record full-time employment in Australia. It is a fact that those on the other side recently voted against, colleagues, our amendments to ensure the definition of casual was properly put, but also to put in place the pathway to permanency from casual employment. Those on the other side voted against it. They also voted against the reforms that we were putting in place to greenfields agreements to ensure greater certainty for the mining sector. And they have the audacity to say that they're going to visit the great state of Western Australia. Mr Albanese said he's taking his shadow cabinet to the great state of Western Australia. And guess what? They can't support reform to greenfields agreements. How can you possibly touch down in the great state of Western Australia? Well, you can stand on a mine site in a high-vis, but guess what? That does not prove that you support the mining industry, and in particular when you don't support the cutting, as Minister Morton does, of red and green tape in the mining industry.
Senator Brockman, a final supplementary question.
Thank you. And this has probably been answered in ample amounts in the last couple of minutes, Minister. But can the minister advise the Senate of any risks to this important sector that would harm our economic recovery?
Order. Order. Senator Cash.
Mr President, when Mr Albanese touches down in Western Australia and the question is put to him, do you support the mining industry and will you support cutting red and green tape in relation to the mining industry, as Premier Mark McGowan does? Colleagues, as Premier Mark McGowan does, will he side with the people of Western Australia, with the Morrison government, with Premier Mark McGowan, or will he look Western Australians in the face and say, I do not support you? And you see, Mr Albanese, you can't just go to Western Australia, stand on a mine site, wear a bit of high-vis and say he supports Western Australia. Because you see, Mr President, there are policies that are here in this place, the Greenfields Agreement. We could bring that on tomorrow to show support to Western Australia, but also the cutting of red and green tape in the mining industry. So I look forward to Mr Albanese going to Western Australia and showing his clear support for the McGowan government and their call supporting the Morrison government for cutting red and green tape in the mining sector.
Before I call the next question, I'd like to draw to the attention of honourable senators the presence in the gallery of the Ambassador of Slovenia to Australia, His Excellency Mr Yuri Riefel. On behalf of all senators, I wish you a warm welcome to the Parliament and in particular to the Senate. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for International Development and the Pacific, Senator Seselja. When asked in 2020 about a net zero by 2050 target, Minister Seselja said it was reckless, and I quote, "the sort of policy you would expect from a minor party like the Greens, but not a party who claims to be the party of government." Is this still the minister's position?
The Minister for International Development and the Pacific, Senator Seselja.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank Senator Gallagher for the question. So, when it comes to action on climate change, our government is it is actually. It's about zero net emissions. That is actually about climate change, Senator. So sorry to break it to you, but when it comes to that, the Morrison government has, of course, signed on to the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement outlines a number of important goals. It does. It outlines a number of important goals. It has things like a 2030 target, something that this government is committed to at 26 to 28%, bringing down emissions, something we are well on track to meet. It also talks about getting to zero net emissions in the second half of the century, and our Prime Minister has said that we intend to get there as soon as possible, and preferably by 2050. Now, one thing that this government won't be doing, and where we absolutely what is absolutely reckless is to make targets or promises with no plan for how you're going to get there, as those opposite do. Now, what are the Labor Party going to do? They don't have a 2030 target because they don't want to tell us how they're going to get there, and when it comes to zero net emissions, they won't tell us. So what are we to take from that, Mr President? Well, it might be that they might go back to previous form. When they were in coalition with the Greens, what did they do? They brought in a carbon tax. That was their main method of bringing down emissions. We on this side are about technology, not taxes. Technology, not taxes. So investing in renewables, working in smart ways on new technologies like hydrogen, but not destroying jobs, be it in regional communities, be it in manufacturing, be it in the outer suburbs. This coalition government will stand for those things whilst meeting and beating our 2030 targets, as we are doing, in contrast to many countries around the world.
Senator Gallagher, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Thank you. Interesting answer. Can the minister confirm that the minister now supports the Prime Minister's preference for net zero by 2050?
Which said today?
Senator Seselja.
Support all policies of the government. Absolutely all policies of the government. As a proud member of this coalition government, I tell you what, I support every one of them because the alternative over on that side of ever higher and higher taxes, of destroying jobs, whether it be in our regions or in our cities, of completely abandoning those people who the Labor Party used to pretend to represent, the working class, the working class, people like me who came from relatively low-income backgrounds. I tell you what, the alternative is UMOB. And what are your alternative policies? Well, it might be to tax your way to your non-existent 2030 target or to your aspirational 2050 target, which you won't tell us how you will get there. We've made it very, very clear that we will put on the table exactly how we're going to reach our targets. That's why we've been successful to date, and we will continue to pursue those kind of policies into the future.
Order. Order. I'll call Senator Gallagher when there's order. We're wasting time for the opposition. On my right, it's not helpful when there's noise from my left. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you. My supplementary. In February, the Deputy Prime Minister wrote that, and I quote, "The Nationals have always been opposed to a net zero target. If the Nationals supported net zero emissions, we would cease to be a party that could credibly represent farmers." Does the minister support the Prime Minister or the Deputy Prime Minister?
Senator Seselja.
Thank you very much. And as I said earlier, I support all policies of this coalition government. And as I pointed to earlier, the fundamental difference And what the Labor Party doesn't seem to understand, maybe the member for Hunter understands it, maybe there are some others, maybe Senator Farrell actually agrees with the member for Hunter, that you don't actually achieve good things for the environment by trashing jobs and trashing industries. I mean, if you look at, this is a party that claims to support gas, and yet the second we put forward a gas-fired generator that actually supports renewables, that actually backs up renewables, what does the Labor Party do? They oppose it. So this side of politics will continue to meet and beat our targets, will continue to grow our economy, will continue to reduce emissions while protecting jobs, protecting livelihoods and growing our economy, in stark contrast to those opposite.
Order. Order. On my left. Order. Senator Wong, Senator Abetz, Senator Waters.
Thanks very much, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Environment Minister. After losing 50% of the coral cover of the Great Barrier Reef since 2015, UNESCO has today recommended that the reef be listed as World Heritage in Danger, pointing out that climate change is the biggest threat to the reef. They have warned Australia of this since 2012, yet the Minister today claimed to have been blindsided and stunned by the decision. How did the government manage to miss the memo that without significant action to address climate change, an in-danger listing was likely? Or is the minister just stunned that your 8 years of lobbying other nations to ignore the science has finally failed?
The Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Senator Waters. Mr President, the Morrison government is deeply committed to protecting the World Heritage-listed Great Barrier Reef. We fully recognise that the Great Barrier Reef is facing pressure from climate change and from other impacts, but we do not support the recommendation to immediately place the reef on the list of World Heritage in Danger, and we will strongly oppose that recommendation. Mr President, we think that this recommendation is premature and doesn't recognise the enormous efforts of the Australian and Queensland governments working with farmers, working with tourism operators, traditional owners and communities right up and down the reef coast to protect the reef and supporting them with a $3 billion joint investment. The government has been stunned by the backflip on previous assurances from UN officials that the reef would not face such a recommendation prior to the UNESCO World Heritage Committee meeting that's being hosted by China this July. We are also concerned about a deviation from normal processes in assessing World Heritage property conservation status. The UNESCO draft decision has been made on the basis of a desktop review, with insufficient first-hand appreciation of the outstanding science-based strategies being jointly funded by Australian and Queensland government. Indeed, the last visit to the Great Barrier Reef by UNESCO officials was in fact in 2014. The Great Barrier Reef is the best-managed reef in the world, and this draft recommendation has been made without examining the reef first-hand and without the latest information. Indeed, of the 83 in danger properties that have been identified by UNESCO, this is in fact the only one that has been singled out, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It is in fact of the 83 properties that have been assessed, this is the only one that has been singled out. All properties could end up on that danger list with no prospect of any individual state party being able to get them off.
Expired. Order. Senator Whish-Wilson. Senator Waters, a supplementary question.
Yes, thanks, President. Your government's inaction on the climate crisis now threatens the 60,000 jobs that rely on the Great Barrier Reef. You won't commit even to net zero by 2050, and now the National Party certainly won't let you do that. But the rest of the world is focused on 2030, and the G7 has called for strong 2030 targets and no new investment in fossil fuels. When will you put the interests of the environment, the economy and our tourism sector ahead of the interests of your fossil fuel donors?
Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President. And may I first reject the premise of that question. I should say, though, that Minister Lee, the Environment Minister, has said on multiple occasions that climate change is indeed the biggest threat to the reef. But the World Heritage Committee is not the forum to make a point about climate change. Moreover, there are more than 80 World Heritage properties that UNESCO has identified as under threat from climate change, and which we all agree is a global problem that requires a global multilateral solution. And if UNESCO had decided to list all of them, well, then that policy would potentially be understandable. But to only pick one of 80 is a subversion of process. It's a subversion of process, and this decision and the motivations behind it are indeed baffling. It sends indeed a very poor message to countries not making. It sends indeed a very poor message to those countries that are not making the investments in reef protection that Australia indeed is.
Senator Waters, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, President. The new Deputy Prime Minister claims to represent rural Australia, and one of the country's most profitable regional assets is the Great Barrier Reef. With the UN recommending the reef be put on the endangered list, when will you stop digging and burning coal and gas which are killing the reef?
Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President. Senator Waters, for over 40 years, the Australian and the Queensland governments have been working together in a strong, cooperative approach to protecting, conserving and managing the reef. And this included the establishment of a standalone management agency, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Authority. In 2015, Australia embarked on a new long-term adaptive planning approach to protecting the reef, and the centrepiece of that is the 35-year Reef 250 long-term sustainability plan. The Reef 2050 plan is delivered jointly between the Australian and Queensland governments in collaboration with local governments, with traditional owners, with researchers, with industries and with communities. The World Heritage Committee asked the government to accelerate efforts to meet the targets of the Reef 2050 plan, and we have done exactly that. The Australian and the Queensland government is investing more than $3 billion from the 2014-15 to 2023-24 to implement the Reef 2050 plan. More than $2 billion of this is from the Australian government, an unprecedented investment.
Has expired. Senator McDonald.
So, I wish to ask a question of the Minister for Women's Economic Security, Senator Hume. Can the minister please update the Senate on the recently announced labour force figures, especially with regard to women's employment, and how the Liberal and National government's economic plan is supporting our recovery and delivering economic opportunities for Australian women?
Minister for Women's Economic Security, Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator McDonald for this question. Mr President, the Morrison government's plan to drive down unemployment in Australia is indeed working. More Australians are in a job now than before the COVID-19 pandemic and the COVID-induced recession that it brought about. Importantly, Mr President, the Morrison government's economic plan is delivering for Australian women specifically. Recently published May workforce figures highlight that there are more women now in the workforce than ever before. Even more women in the workforce now than the record female participation rates that were achieved in April this year. Mr President, overall unemployment has dropped to 5.1% from April to May, and the number of employed women has increased by 69,000 in May. 1.6% above the start of pandemic levels. And the good news doesn't stop there, Mr President. The hours that are worked are also up, now 4.1% higher for women than prior to the pandemic. And in addition, more women that want additional hours are able to get them, with female underemployment now 1.9% lower than prior to the pandemic. And this is the lowest rate in over a decade. Mr President, these are not just numbers. These are Australian women who are getting ahead. These are Australian women that are improving their lives, who are getting more hours of work than ever before. And each one of these success stories is a story of independence. It's a story of taking control and managing women taking control and managing their own economic security, their own economic well-being and their future prosperity, as well as securing our economic recovery and strengthening Australia. There are few things in this world more important to women's economic security than a good job, and the Morrison government is delivering on exactly that for Australian women.
Senator McDonald, a supplementary question.
Minister, it's disappointing that those on the other side are so uninterested in women's participation. I would ask you to continue to outline to the Senate the most recent women's workforce participation figures and what is driving them.
Before I call Senator Hume, I again ask for silence during the question being asked. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr. President. You're right, I couldn't really hear the question, but I'll guess what it was. Mr. President, the most recent women's workforce participation rate is higher than it's ever been recorded in Australia, increasing by nearly 4% over the course of 2021. The latest women's workforce participation rate beats Australia's record figures from April this year. Mr. President, Senator McDonald asked what might be driving this increase in economic participation. Well, Mr. President, it's the Morrison government's strong economic management that this government's plan for a stronger Australia that is delivering for Australian women. But the Morrison government is also providing more women with more choice by reducing the cost pressures of childcare, with even more support announced in the 2021-22 budget. Women will have the incentive to stay connected to their employer and to work that extra day or those extra hours should they wish to do so.
Senator McDonald, a final supplementary question.
Can the minister advise the Senate of the recent gender pay gap figures and how they have changed over time?
Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank again Senator McDonald. I'm very glad you asked because the present gender pay gap is in fact at a record low of 13.4%. And it's no coincidence that it's coalition governments that drive the gender pay gap lower. In fact, when the coalition government left government in 2007, the gender pay gap was 15.4% and on its way down. However, when the Labor came to government, they oversaw a gender pay gap that went as high as 17.4%. That's right. The gender pay gap in Australia went up considerably under Labor. And it's taken a coalition government to get this figure back down on the right trajectory, heading down once again. And we won't stop here, Mr. President. In the 2021-22 budget, we announced a targeted review of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, and with the aim of pushing that gender pay gap even lower. Australians know that it's the Morrison government that delivers those opportunities for Australian women. Real equality is not about platitudes, it's about opportunity.
Answer has expired. There is too much noise during answers. Seriously, Senator Ayres and Green, if I'm calling the chamber to order, Senator McAllister and on my right, who I didn't see, if I'm calling the chamber to order, can people please be quiet and have some respect for the procedures of the chamber? Senator O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Reynolds. Western Australia's Nationals leader, Mia Davies, has said of newly appointed Deputy Prime Minister Joyce's return, and I quote, "I'm disappointed the party felt they needed to change leaders. I think it shows they're focused on internal matters instead of the people of regional Australia." Is Ms Davies correct?
The Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and I thank the senator for the question. Can I say this is fairly and squarely a matter for the National Party of Australia and not for government. But can I just say the Liberal National Party coalition has been an enduring one for 7 decades, and it will continue. And it will continue very strongly.
Senator O'Neill, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Jess Price-Purnell, a former national member for 11 years and former chairwoman of the New South Wales National Women's Council, has said of Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce's return, and I quote, "It's actually pretty devastating. There's only so many times you can bang your head up against a brick wall." Is Ms Price-Purnell correct?
Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. Can I just say that again that is a matter for the National Party. From all of us here who sit on this side of the
I've
parliament.
got Senator Reynolds. Senator Reynolds, please. I've got Senator O'Neill on a point of order.
This is the correct minister who is representing the Deputy Prime Minister,
what is
Senator
the point
Reynolds.
of order, Senator,
if this
Senator
is how she
O'Neill?
commences representing
Senator O'Neill,
that minister,
what is the point of order?
The point of order is this is within the minister's remit,
Senator O'Neill,
and absorbing herself of responsibility simply isn't appropriate.
Senator O'Neill, again, if I'm speaking, I expect senators to be quiet. Firstly, You rose when the minister had been speaking for less than 5 seconds. I don't think that is a reasonable— It took me a while to get senators to be quiet, but Senator O'Neill rose less than 5 seconds into the answer, and I, with respect, do not think, unless there's an egregious breach of standing orders, it is appropriate to try and assert an issue of relevance, which I'll assume you were trying to assert then. I'm listening carefully to the minister's answer. The minister is entitled to answer in a form she sees fit, as long as she is directly relevant to the question. Senator Reynolds to continue.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President. And can I continue by saying that we have had an enduring partnership for 7 decades, which has served Australia and particularly rural and regional Australia very well, and that will certainly continue. And can I join the Prime Minister and I know all colleagues on this side for thanking Michael McCormack for his dedicated service as Deputy Prime Minister. Michael will continue to be an invaluable member of the National Party and also of our coalition. He was a passionate advocate for the regional and rural communities, as will the new leader and the National Party team continue to be.
The new leader's talent.
Order on both sides. Senator O'Neill, a final. Senators McAllister, Polly, Brown.
President.
Senator O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr President. Deputy Leader of the Victorian Nationals, Steph Ryan, has said, and I quote, "I've never made a secret of the fact that I think Barnaby Joyce's previous actions didn't really make him eligible for the top job." Which previous actions is Ms Ryan referring to, and does the minister agree with Ms Ryan?
I'm going to say that we have. I'm going to make a rule. I'm going to make a statement on this question before I call the minister. A minister can be asked about public statements of themselves that they have made that are outside their portfolio or matters relevant to the minister that they represent. That particular second supplementary question refers to a claimed quote, I'm not disputing it, from a member of the state parliament in Victoria that doesn't directly link, in my view, to the minister that Senator Reynolds represents, and so the minister can answer it to the extent that she is able to, because it doesn't actually draw, in my view, to a matter here. Senator Wong, on the point of order.
Yeah, on the point of order, Mr President, I simply make this point. This is a question to a person representing the Deputy Prime Minister, and there's obviously a much broader remit when it comes to the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, and it actually goes to the suitability of the person now occupying the job. Now, if it is your ruling that that is not relevantly a matter to be addressed to the person representing him, we accept that. I would submit it is entirely reasonable for the opposition to put to the person representing the Deputy Prime Minister whether or not he is in fact suitable to retain that role. I
take your point, Senator Wong, and I would rule I'm not ruling this question out of order. I'm just preempting what I might anticipate might be a point of order. If the question was phrased in the way that you put it, I would not make this observation. But my badly handwritten notes here refer to a quote from a Victorian state member of parliament that doesn't actually ask the minister or Deputy Prime Minister's view on the matter. It just simply asserts. And so I'll call the minister. I think it didn't use "does the minister agree," does it? Okay. There was another part. Yep.
If I can assist, I understand your ruling in respect of which actions is Ms Ryan referring to. So you may not have heard Senator O'Neill went on to say, "Does the minister agree with Ms Ryan?"
So I heard the first part, and I viewed the second part in context of the first. I'll ask the minister to respond to the question if she deems appropriate, given what I've just said. Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President, for that clarification. And again, I just repeat that those are internal party matters for the National Party of Australia, not ones for this side. Can I say I welcome Barnaby Joyce to the role, and also I look very much forward to working with him and representing him here in this chamber, because I know that all the National Party members strongly support rural and regional Australia, and as part of this coalition government they have delivered time and time again for rural and regional Australia in partnership with the Liberal Party in coalition.
Senator McMahon.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management, Senator Ruston. Can the Minister please inform the Senate of the importance of a seasonal workforce for our agricultural sector in securing the economic recovery in rural and regional communities following the challenges posed by COVID?
Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And can I thank Senator McMahon for her question and her ongoing interest in ensuring the farmers of Australia, and particularly the farmers of the Northern Territory, have got the workforce that they need to be able to harvest their crops. We know that the Australian agricultural sector is an absolute economic powerhouse for this country. Last year alone, $66 billion generated in our rural and regional economies through our agricultural exploits. And our farmers and our exporters should be absolutely justifiably very proud of the achievements that they deliver on behalf of Australia, feeding 80 million people worldwide, employing 1.6 million Australians. It is absolutely one of the absolute underlying economic drivers of the Australian economy. But as you would know, Senator McMahon, in many places around the country, we have a significant reliance on an overseas workforce in order to support our agricultural sector. In fact, there are some places around the country where 90% of the workforce actually comes from overseas. Through the pandemic, because of the reduction in the number of working holiday makers that were in Australia falling quite significantly, it has absolutely highlighted the challenges that are faced by our regional communities. And that's why this government, the Morrison-Joyce government, has put in place programs to support the agricultural sector like Ag Attract. And these sorts of programs, together are able to provide the agricultural sector with the workforce, the skills, and to continue to build on its workforce to ensure that the farmers of Australia have the workforce that they need. Furthermore, we also introduced the National Agricultural Workers Code in September last year to facilitate mobility in the agricultural sector so that we could make sure that we get workers to be able to move across borders much more easily, to make sure that we were providing the workforce that the Australian farmers need to get their crops off and to make money for Australia.
Senator Ruston. Senator McMahon, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Unlike those opposite, who have no support for agriculture whatsoever, can the minister outline the ways that the Liberals and Nationals government is supporting our farmers to meet their workforce needs?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. The government of which I'm proud to be a member and of which Senator McMahon is also proud to be a member have worked extremely hard to make sure that we have programs in place so that we can support our farmers through the pandemic. And one such program is a program that's very close to the heart to both myself and Minister Payne, which is the Pacific Labour Scheme. Can I also acknowledge the amazing advocacy from Senator McMahon and leadership on the matter to make sure that there were adequate workforce in the Northern Territory to make sure that your mango crop got picked this year. You were faced with a crisis, you came to us, and we were able to solve the problem by bringing in a number of people from Vanuatu to enable the crop in the Northern Territory to be picked. That happened back in September, and it was a great success. In addition to that, the government has introduced the Agricultural Workers Code to make sure, as I said, that the state borders were open, and we also moved to introduce AgMove to provide support to people to move to the country
Senator Ruston.
Support our
Senator
agricultural
McMahon, a
sector.
final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How will the recently announced agricultural visa further assist farmers to meet their workforce requirements now and into the future, in addition to existing highly successful labour mobility arrangements?
Order on my left during the questions. Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, the new agricultural visa arrangements will be very important in putting in place a workforce for our agricultural sector to play an absolutely essential role in delivering the workers that we all know on this side are needed for us to be able to pick our crops. The success of the Pacific Workers Scheme has demonstrated how these sorts of programs are able to supplement the workforce for our agricultural sector to make sure that we're able to get the crops off. I mean, currently in Australia at the moment we have over 12,000 people from the Pacific and Timor-Leste to help, and more are on their way. The government is currently consulting with stakeholders on the streamlining of these programs to make sure that they work even better, to make sure that
that our agricultural workforce is there so that we can pick the crops, we can harvest the fruit and make sure that we're providing the food not just to Australia but to the rest of the world, the clean, green, world-class produce that Australian farmers are so famous for.
Order. Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is for the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister Payne. 3 weeks ago you stated you were seized of the matter of urgently processing visas for Afghan civilians who put their lives at risk working for the Australian government, including the Defence Force, Foreign Affairs and AusAid, during Australia's longest war in Afghanistan. Since the ADF's departure from southern Afghanistan in 2013, at least 9 of the local civilians who work for AusAid's flagship stability and development project in that province have been murdered by the Taliban. Australian civilians were targeted for working on it, and Afghani civilians are being murdered for it. Will the government approve visas and conduct emergency evacuation for Afghan contractors and their families whose lives are in terrible danger from Taliban reprisals?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Lambie for her question. Senator, Senator, through you, Mr President, as you're aware, this program has been underway since 2012. A special humanitarian visa program has seen over 1,400 visas offered since the program began. Referring to your more specific or more recent questions in relation to the last period of time, we have granted over 186 visas since April this year. So in the last 6 or 7 weeks, Senator Lambie. This is absolutely a priority for the Australian government, supporting those locally engaged employees who have supported Australia's mission in Afghanistan, as you have said. Many of them have given an enormous amount and they have worked under very difficult circumstances. So what we are doing is working swiftly across agencies. It involves the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Department of Defence and the Department of Home Affairs to ensure each case is considered and those who are at risk of harm who meet the visa requirements are resettled to Australia as soon as possible. Senator Lambie, in terms of the transport and the movement of those applicants who are successful, the International Organisation for Migration, the IOM, and the Australian departments and agencies work to both transport and assist those Afghanis who assisted us.
Senator Lambie, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Just yesterday, your department rejected the visa application for a site manager of this project, who is now in hiding and receiving constant threats from the Taliban. They've already made multiple attempts on his life. What kind of danger does he need to be in order for his life to be considered worth saving?
Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Each case is examined and considered in terms of the individual's experience in terms of the role they held with Australian forces and Australian staff. Each locally engaged employee has a number of factors taken into account and a number of things that need to be considered in what are difficult circumstances: identity, the accuracy of their claim of employment, the risk to the individual. For my part, as the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the advice that the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade provides to me on the validity of the application, and then if they are agreed, I am in a position to certify that the application should be considered by Home Affairs, which is something I have done both in this role, Senator Lambie, and in my previous role as the Minister for Defence.
Senator Lambie, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Absolutely shameful, but your coalition has had 7 years to get this job done. The world is watching how we treat our mates here. What kind of message does it send to the rest of the world that when you work with the Australian government, you're taking your life into your own hands?
Senator Payne.
Senator Lambie, I understand that that these are issues which are deeply felt, including by you. Over the last number of years, as I set out in my first response, more than 1,400 visas have been issued since the program began.
And in terms of applications that have been received in the recent period, 186 visas have been granted since April of this year, Senator. There are a number of other locally engaged staff and families who have applied for visas. They are in the process of being certified and being assessed, and then they will be assisted if they qualify under the regulation, Senator. This is a very, very important process. We take it very seriously. We deeply appreciate the support provided to us by Afghani locals in both the context that you have raised and in terms of assistance to the Australian Defence Force. That is why 1,400 visas have been issued since the program began, and it is why we are continuing that process as of right now.
Senator Murray-Smith.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia, Senator Ruston. Just hours after rolling the Deputy Prime Minister, the Nationals in the Senate split with the Morrison government, voting to walk away from the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. When did the minister first become aware the junior coalition partner no longer supports the implementation of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan in full and on time?
The Minister representing the Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and thank you very much, Senator Smith, for your question. Well, the government policy remains that we are absolutely supporting of making sure that we have a sustainable Murray-Darling Basin system going into the future for all Australians that rely on it. And that means that the communities that are along the river, the farmers that grow the produce and the fibre as a result of the use of that water, whether it be Australians who rely on it as a source of drinking water, as it is in the case in South Australia where I live and where Senator Smith lives as well. It is absolutely essential that we have a sustainable river system going into the future, and that's why 12 years ago we came together in this place in a bipartisan agreement to make sure that we delivered for a sustainable system. And that's when we put an absolutely once-in-a-generation opportunity, put together a plan. I mean, this is probably one of the most ambitious water plans or ambitious environmental and agricultural combined plans that has ever been agreed to in this place. 14 chambers of governments around Australia agreed to the implementation of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and I pay tribute to everybody in this place, whether they're here today, we're here when the plan was first put into place, or whether they've left this place now, and other parliaments around Australia, for having the foresight to realise the importance of this plan, the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. And as we go forward, we know that we will have challenges to make sure that we continue to work together collectively to deliver the plan on behalf of all Australians. But the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and none of us should shy away, has got some very significant complexities, but that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't all be working towards making sure that we continue to deliver the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. And we will continue to put new initiatives in place, applying innovative solutions about how we can get more water to our environmental sites, but at the same time—
Senator Ruston, time for the answer has expired. Senator Smith, a supplementary question.
When Mr Joyce was last the Deputy Prime Minister, he declared the water promised under the Murray-Darling Basin Plan didn't have a hope in Hades of being delivered. Is abandoning the Murray-Darling Basin Plan the position of the Morrison-Joyce government?
Senator Ruston.
The position of the Morrison government is absolutely commitment to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. And just because we put on the record that there are some difficulties and complexities in delivering such a complicated and complex plan as the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, does not mean in any way that this government has moved away from its commitment for the delivery of the plan for all Australians. Whether, as I said, they're not just Australians that live in the cities, but the Australians that live along the Murray-Darling Basin, the communities that rely on the water, the farmers that rely on the water for their livelihoods, and the full infrastructure of rural and regional Australia in the Murray-Darling Basin catchment area to make sure that they continue into the future to be able to get access to water to support their communities. So the position and the commitment of this government has not changed. We are absolutely 100% committed to the delivery of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and for the benefit of our farmers and the communities that live along the river, as well as those in the city.
Senator Smith, a final supplementary question.
Mr Joyce has never supported the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. He famously once told South Australians to move to where the water is. will the minister recommit to implementing the Murray-Darling Basin Plan in full and on time?
Senator Ruston.
Well, I don't need to recommit to anything because we've never moved away from our commitment, Senator Smith. Now, there are many people who have made many comments in relation to the difficulties in being able to deliver this really ambitious plan. But that doesn't change. That does not change the commitment of this government to remain absolutely focused on the delivery of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. And we will continue to work with jurisdictions because, as I said, this is a plan for all Australians and all states that sit within the basin. This is not just the federal government, it's the Queensland government, the ACT government, the New South Wales government, the Victorian government and the South Australian government. We'll continue to work together to deliver the plan because every single state knows that the outcome of not delivering the plan is absolutely a negative outcome for their states and their territories. So we remain committed to that. So any suggestion whatsoever that we have moved away from our commitment to the delivery of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is factually incorrect.
Senator Betts. Senator Betts.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for International Development and the Pacific. Can the Minister update the Senate on how the Liberal National Government is responding to the health and economic challenges posed by COVID-19 in our region and how this supports our own health security and economic recovery?
Minister for International Development and the Pacific, Senator Seselja.
Thank you very much. We're all very aware of the devastation that COVID is causing around the world, with around 10,000 deaths a day. Serious outbreaks in our region, of course, threaten both our region's health and security and, of course, Australia's health and security and our economy. And that's why we've pivoted our aid program to respond, and we've added $1 billion in additional COVID-19-related spending to help our region weather the storm. Now, this year we are providing record funding of nearly $1.7 billion to the Pacific, 50% higher than when Labor was last in office. And to help contain Fiji's current outbreak, we've already provided 250,000 Australian vaccines. At least 750,000 more will follow. Now, yesterday, a joint Australian and New Zealand medical assistance team arrived in Fiji, and our support has helped Fiji to maintain its world-class levels of testing and contact tracing. In PNG, Australia has reprioritised well over $100 million to support PNG's COVID-19 response and provided an additional $52 million in targeted financing for critical health and education services. And this is in addition to providing PNG with AUSMAT teams, Australian vaccines and substantial supplies of personal protective equipment to bolster PNG's COVID-19 response. And nowhere is the threat to Australia more acute than in the Torres Strait. So vaccinating the communities on both sides of the Torres Strait is critical to Australia's health security. On the Australian side, almost 95% of the eligible population on Australia's outer islands of Saibai, Boigu and Darwin have received their first dose of vaccines. And with Australian support, Western Province is currently PNG's third best performing province in vaccine delivery, a remarkable achievement given its geography. The government remains absolutely focused on protecting Australians from COVID-19 at every level, globally, regionally, domestically and on our borders.
Betts, a supplementary question.
I thank the Minister for that interesting answer and ask further, can the Minister outline the government's efforts to provide vaccines to our neighbours and how this supports regional health security?
Senator Seselja.
Well, thank you. And our Prime Minister recently said that helping to vaccinate the Pacific is both a moral and an economic necessity, and indeed it is. And that's why we've committed more than $750 million to supporting vaccine access for our region. We're delivering this through 4 pathways. $130 million for the COVAX facility, which has already distributed over 15 million doses to Southeast Asia and the Pacific, $523 million to help countries in the Pacific and Southeast Asia access and roll out vaccines, and $100 million under the Quad vaccine partnership focusing on last-mile delivery. And finally, and most directly, from Australia's own supply, we will share at least 20 million doses in our region. We've already delivered almost 360,000 doses, including 250,000 to Fiji, 70,000 to Timor-Leste, almost 19,000 at PNG, 13,000 to the Solomons, 7,000 to Tuvalu. Australia is leading the delivery of vaccines across the Pacific for the health security and prosperity of Australia and of our region.
Has expired. Senator Abetz, a final supplementary question.
Can the minister update the Senate on how the government is otherwise supporting economic stability and resilience in our region?
Senator Seselja.
Well, thank you. And COVID-19, of course, poses extraordinary economic risks to our region. To support regional stability, including our own, the Australian government is stepping up our economic response. Across the Pacific, we are delivering over $300 million in grant funding to support economic recovery. Nearly $200 million of this has already been delivered. In Fiji, we're bolstering social protection schemes for the most vulnerable. In Timor-Leste, we're building water systems, roads, bridges, health clinics and schools. Our work has also enabled the restart of the Pacific Labour Scheme to help Australian farmers and Pacific economies. Nearly 8,000 Pacific workers have arrived in Australia since September 2020, and our loan financing is taking effect too. Just last week, we signed financing agreements with the Solomon Islands government for the Tina River transmission system. Our support, worth approximately $60 million in total, will help deliver renewable energy to Honiara. This is vital work that is supporting our regions and our nation's economic recovery.
Senator Faruqi.
Mr. President, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Education, Senator Reynolds. An investigation by the 9 newspapers found Australia's 50 wealthiest private schools now have assets worth $8.5 billion. This grew by more than 40% over just 4 years. The investigation also found the combined surpluses for those top 50 schools was almost $400 million in 2019, while still receiving public funding for more than $620 million in the same year. Minister, why does the government continue to overfund these obscenely rich private schools that are running surpluses and accumulating enormous wealth?
The Minister representing the Minister for Education and Youth, Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. President, and thank you very much, Senator Faruqi, for that question. Can I just say there is nothing further from the truth. This government is not abandoning any student, any school, and never will. The federal government has clear responsibilities, as do state and territories. Now, the DMI method gives a more accurate capacity of families to contribute to the cost of non-government schooling. This ensures that Commonwealth funding is better targeted and it is fairer. The move to DMI will result in an estimated additional $3.2 billion in funding for non-government schools using the new method, were done in May 2020. So from 2022, all schools will have their funding adjusted according to the capacity of their school community to contribute, as assessed under this new methodology. The government has put in place a range of supports to assist non-government schools with the transition to DMI school funding. Now, these arrangements include the financially best socio-economic stated SES score, or the new DMI score funding in 2020 and 2021. Secondly, a gradual transition through to 2029 for schools transitioning downward to their share of schooling resource standards. And thirdly, an extra $1.2 billion from 2020 to 2029 for non-government schools through the Choice and Availability Fund. And fourthly, what we are doing is establishing a robust review process to address unexpected or unique circumstances affecting the financial capacity of a school's community. The fund includes requirements that non-government representative bodies provide a specific level of support to transition regional and remote schools, and also, secondly, a consolidated annual report on the expenditure to ensure accountability and transparency. So this government's record beats that of any other government,
Reynolds,
particularly those on the other side.
Has expired. Senator Faruqi, a supplementary question.
Minister, under current funding arrangements, private schools will be overfunded by $6 billion from now until 2029, and public schools will be underfunded to $58 billion over the same period. The Choice and Affordability Slush Fund will dish out more than $100 million every year to private schools, while public schools are completely locked out. Minister, what on earth happened to needs-based funding?
Senator Reynolds.
Look, thank you very much again for that question. And can I just say the truth and the facts matter. And let me share with all of those in this chamber about the truth of this matter. So, first of all, funding comparisons for government and non-government schools, 2013 to 2022. The Commonwealth funding for government schools has doubled. In fact, just over doubled, 100.7% since 2013, and we'll see a further increase to 2029 of 46%. The facts matter, and we have funded government schools more than those on the other side of this chamber ever did.
Order on my
Additionally,
left.
from 2013 to 2019, from 2029, government schools funding will have increased by 192%.
Senator O'Neill.
This government, since 2013 to 2029, will have nearly provided a 200% increase for government schools.
Order, Senator Reynolds. Time for the answer has expired. Senator Faruqi, a final supplementary question.
Minister, last month's budget revealed that private schools are set to receive over $20 billion more federal money than public schools over the next 4 years. And this government seems to be hell-bent on exacerbating the funding inequalities between private and public schools. Minister, why is the government continuing to betray more than 2.5 million public school students and thousands of under-resourced and underpaid public school teachers?
Senator Reynolds.
Well, again, that is simply not true, Mr. President. So Senator Faruqi talks about individual students. Let me tell you what the figures are for individual students under this government. Since 2013 to 2022, Commonwealth funding per student in government schools has increased by nearly 80%. Since 2013, and we'll see a further increase of 72.2% to 2029. Commonwealth funding per student for non-government schools has grown by 53.6% since 2013, and still will increase, but see a further increase of 53.6% to 2029. Additionally, from 2013 to 2029, government school funding per student will have increased by 127%, 127% per child. And again, in comparison, from 13 to 2029, non-government school funding will have increased
Senator
by
Reynolds,
81%.
time for the answer has expired. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. Well, much as I'd like to hear more about record funding for Australian schools, I ask that further questions be placed on notice.